Every doubt, every fear, every deeply held desire a person feels in the present may have far deeper and sometimes unexpected roots than it seems at first glance. Imagine that long-past childhood, that very time many prefer not to revisit in their thoughts, as if it were a locked door, continues to invisibly, yet powerfully, influence decision-making, the formation of interpersonal relationships, and even one's most intimate self-perception. Regardless of how diligently attempts are made to ignore this whisper from the past, there are undeniable signs whose truth is beyond doubt. These signs were discovered decades ago by Jung, one of the greatest explorers of the human soul, whose insights still illuminate the path to understanding oneself. What will be revealed next is not merely information, but a profound invitation to look inside your own essence, to uncover what is hidden, and perhaps to change the trajectory of your life once and for all. Prepare yourself, for the upcoming discoveries are capable of overturning your habitual perceptions of yourself and the world. See, Jung was no ordinary thinker. His genius lay in his relentless quest to penetrate beyond the obvious. He did not limit himself to a superficial analysis of phenomena, but on the contrary, with unparalleled courage and insight, delved deep into the abysses of the human psyche. There, in these uncharted depths, he uncovered something fundamental, something that invisibly yet strongly connects all people: the powerful unconscious. And this is by no means merely an abstract academic concept, lost among the dusty pages of old treatises. Jung discovered that within each individual lies an entire world, not just a collection of memories, but a true universe of experienced emotions and unhealed wounds that do not disappear simply because a person has reached maturity. This discovery takes on particular significance if childhood was filled with difficult trials, if it contained moments of agonizing loneliness, sharp rejection, all-consuming chaos, or oppressive silence that weighed on the child's soul more heavily than any words. This hidden world full of unspoken stories persistently cries out, demanding to be heard. And it is precisely its unsolved mysteries that often give rise to that inexplicable feeling of inner disharmony, when a person feels as if something within them is broken or damaged, but cannot grasp the true source of this deep, hidden pain. One of the first signs manifests in sensations. Consider this. How often have you felt out of place when, despite all efforts, an inner voice persistently whispered about your own inadequacy? According to Carl Gustav Jung, such an experience is by no means accidental. He introduced the concept of the shadow in his works. This shadow represents the part of the human personality that remains hidden, denied, deeply buried in the subconscious, because the individual fears looking it directly in the face. It is noteworthy that the origins of this shadow often go back to the earliest years of an individual's life. Perhaps its formation began when someone around them instilled a sense of their own insufficient worth, or when they had to suppress their tears and emotions so as not to inconvenience loved ones. Or perhaps at the moment when the necessity of wearing a mask for survival in difficult conditions was learned. This shadow did not vanish without a trace when the person reached adulthood. It is still present today, awaiting its recognition and integration. Now pause for a moment and take a deep breath. Have you ever felt as if you are carrying an inexplicable burden? As if you are dragging something unseen, invisible, yet steadily exhausting and tiring you? According to Jung, such a burden originates in the depths of the unconscious, and if your childhood years were associated with significant difficulties or traumas, it is highly likely that this unconscious is filled with numerous unprocessed memories and emotional imprints. This refers not only to major psychological traumas. Sometimes seemingly insignificant daily details serve as the source. It could be a harsh remark that deeply etched itself into memory, or a disapproving glance that made one feel worthless and insignificant, or even the silence of someone who should have provided protection and support but failed to do so. Such experiences do not disappear spontaneously over time. They transform into a kind of sign that the soul sends to the individual in the present. persistently imploring them to hear, understand, and accept them. It is important to note that Carl Jung not only identified certain signs but also proposed methods for understanding and healing them. He held the conviction that the unconscious is not an adversary, but rather serves as a valuable guide on life's journey. However, to heed its messages, one must be willing to face what causes pain. The question arises, do you have enough courage to stop avoiding and start comprehending the reasons behind your feelings? For if childhood was overshadowed by difficulties, there are aspects that the unconscious has sought to communicate throughout your life. And in this context, today, we will attempt to begin deciphering them. Among the most distinct signs Jung pointed to is the sudden feeling of emptiness. An individual might be having a perfectly good day, when everything seems normal, and then suddenly, without an obvious precursor, feel this oppressive void in their chest. The reason for its appearance may be unclear, but its presence is undeniable. Jung would interpret this not as a random occurrence, but as a reminder from the unconscious about something unresolved. Perhaps at an early age you learned to detach from your emotions as a means of survival. Perhaps you had to demonstrate strength when internally you were ready to break, or put on a smile while an unvoiced scream resonated within. This emptiness serves as a signal that there are aspects of your personality that still require attention, acceptance, and healing. You are not alone in this feeling. Many have experienced such inner emptiness. There was a time when such a state was considered normal, as something everyone silently carried within them. However, thanks to Carl Jung's teachings, it has become clear that this doesn't have to be the case. This emptiness is not an inescapable fate, but rather a kind of door. It is a passage to deep self-love, to forming more authentic and sincere relationships, to a life that can truly fill your existence with meaning. But to cross this threshold, you must be prepared to look back at your early years and ask, what beliefs about myself were instilled in my youth? What invisible wounds still bear their imprint, remaining unconscious? Let's take a moment for reflection. It's important to momentarily immerse yourself in memories of your childhood. There's no need to relive every painful detail. Just ask yourself a key question. Was there a time when you felt undervalued or inadequate? Perhaps it was something someone said, or conversely, something that wasn't said but was vitally important to hear. It's important to keep this image in mind, as we will return to it later. For now, remember, your past experiences were not your fault, but the responsibility for their healing lies with you. And Carl Jung offered effective methods for this process. Now that the door to understanding is ajar, let's let in a little more light. Carl Jung didn't just discuss the shadow or the unconscious as something dark and mysterious. He also showed that within this seemingly chaotic inner world, there exists a kind of map, a guiding blueprint for who you are meant to become. However, if your childhood was marked by difficulties, this map might have become blurry, marred with unclear markings. And one of the most significant signs of such markings manifests in how you treat yourself in the present. The question is, do you show kindness to yourself, or does your inner dialogue resemble a conversation with a sworn enemy? For Jung would assert that the manner in which you treat yourself is a direct echo of what was learned in your early years. Consider this. If you grew up in an environment where love was conditional, where you were valued solely for your actions and not for who you inherently were, then you likely learned to hold yourself to impossible standards. Perhaps today you are overly demanding of yourself, punishing yourself for every mistake, or feeling that you never achieve enough. This circumstance is far from accidental. It serves as a sign that your unconscious is still tied to an old script, one that was written for you a long time ago. But here lies the hopeful news. Jung taught that this script can be rewritten. Let's briefly consider the phenomenon of interpersonal relationships, as it represents another important indicator deserving close attention. Often individuals find themselves constantly attracting similar types of personalities into their lives. We are talking about those who tend to make one feel insignificant, who systematically drain their emotional resources, forcing them to doubt their true worth. The great psychologist Carl Jung termed this phenomenon projection. According to his teaching, everything a person notices in others, whether it irritates or attracts them, is essentially a reflection of certain inner aspects of their own psyche. In cases where an individual's childhood was fraught with difficulties, it is quite probable that they may have learned a pattern of seeking attachment where it objectively did not exist. Perhaps a habit formed of begging for attention, settling for meager displays of affection, because that was the only relationship pattern known from early years. Take another moment to pause and deeply consider these words. Does such a situation resonate in your life? Is there someone in your current environment who constantly forces you to feel the need to prove something? If the answer to this question is affirmative, it's important not to succumb to self-condemnation, but merely to listen carefully to your inner feelings. Carl Jung would argue that the appearance of such a person in your life is by no means accidental. It is a kind of significant sign, a mirror that the unconscious places before you so that you can see something that still remains unhealed within you. Perhaps it's a deep sense of rejection experienced in childhood, or a persistent feeling that you were never a true priority for significant figures. However, the key point is this: there is no need to continue reproducing this destructive behavioral pattern. The concept of self-love. Although Carl Jung did not directly name this concept, self-knowledge and self-acceptance formed the fundamental basis of his analytical psychology. He held the conviction that a fulfilling existence becomes possible only when a person is able to integrate all aspects of their personality, including those connected with painful experiences or traumas. If someone's childhood was marked by adversity, it is highly probable that such a person developed a habit of hiding, dimming their inner light so as not to cause discomfort to others. But a legitimate question arises: how much longer will you continue to sacrifice yourself? How long will you allow the traumas of your past to dictate how you perceive yourself in the present? Imagine such a scene for a moment. Picture yourself as a child again, but this time standing before someone who can see your true essence, who says these words: "You are beautiful just as you are. You don't need to change anything about yourself." What feelings does this evoke within you? According to Jung, this someone can be you in your present state, for self-love is not merely a privilege or a luxury, but an absolute necessity for a full life. And if your childhood years instilled doubts about your own worth, then today is the starting point to begin shedding that false belief. We now turn to another significant concept left to us by Carl Jung: emotional chaos. Often a person encounters the feeling that their emotional state resembles a roller coaster. One day they feel perfectly well, but the very next they are in the grip of uncertainty, anxiety, or irritation, without realizing the true reasons for this state. Jung asserted that such chaos is not a sign of a personal flaw. On the contrary, it represents the voice of the unconscious, demanding to be heard. If an individual developed in an unstable environment where predictability was absent, their mind inevitably learned to be constantly on guard. And today, even when external circumstances have drastically changed, the inner world of the person still reacts as if under threat. However, there is a special beauty hidden in this phenomenon. Jung did not perceive chaos as something hostile. For him, it was a harbinger of something new. You can imagine this chaos as a powerful storm. Yes, it is strong and noisy, but calm invariably follows, and it is in this tranquility that one finds the opportunity to begin the process of restoration. Therefore, the next time you feel this emotional whirlwind inside, do not turn away from it. On the contrary, it's important to pause and ask yourself, what exactly is this state trying to show me? What part of my childhood still needs attention and healing? You are invited to perform an exercise. Allow yourself to momentarily detach from daily worries and close your eyes. Then, focus on the emotion that may have been bothering you recently. It could be deep sadness, inexplicable fear, or anger, whose origin remains a mystery. Imagining this emotion as a small child yearning to be heard, you might consider, what would you say to this inner child? It is recommended to keep this thought in mind as we will later discuss in detail how such inner wounds can be healed. For now, it is important to remember human emotions are not enemies. On the contrary, they serve as important messengers. The narrative approaches a crucial turning point, and it's important that the reader maintains full attention. Carl Jung, an eminent thinker, not only provided humanity with a method for deeply understanding inner wounds, but also pointed the way to their transformation. If an individual's childhood was marred by complexities or traumas, there is a characteristic sign that often manifests in their interpersonal relationships, a feeling of ceaseless confrontation. Does it sometimes feel as though certain connections, be they friendships, romantic relationships, or even family ties, resemble a battlefield? Do frequent misunderstandings escalate into bitter arguments? And is there that oppressive feeling of one-sided giving, where one seems to pour all their energy and resources without receiving anything in return? According to the Jungian approach, what is sometimes perceived as a series of failures or bad luck is, in reality, a reflection of deeply ingrained patterns in the human unconscious, formed many years ago. Just consider, if you grew up in an environment where the display of love or affection was strictly conditional, where you literally had to fight for a modicum of tenderness or attention, then your consciousness likely solidified the belief that any relationship is a continuous battle. Subsequently, often unconsciously, you continue to seek and reproduce precisely this dynamic in all your interactions. However, there is a fundamental truth that Jung sought to convey. There is no need to endlessly continue this struggle. Those relationships that drain your strength and energy are not a predetermined fate. On the contrary, they serve as a clear signal that deep inner changes are brewing within you. In this regard, it is appropriate to briefly turn to the concept of letting go. What would happen if you decided to free yourself from connections with people who exhaust you? Such a step undoubtedly can evoke a strong sense of fear. It is quite possible that an anxious thought might arise. If I let them go, who will remain by my side? But Jung offered a truly revolutionary perspective on this process. He asserted that when an individual refuses to hold on to what does not truly belong to them or serve their well-being, they thereby create free space for what is truly meant for them. You can imagine human life as a beautiful garden. If you stubbornly continue to water withered or alien plants, you will never have the opportunity for new, living flowers to grow. Every person deserves their garden to be full of abundance, vitality, and beauty, not thorny thistles and decay. You need to pause again and take a deep breath. The question arises, is there someone in your life whose presence feels oppressive? Perhaps it's someone who, after interacting with them, leaves you exhausted, humiliated, or completely disoriented. There's no need to answer aloud, but it's important to be completely honest with yourself. According to Jung's teaching, such a person could be perceived as a direct reflection of some inner part that you have not yet been able to integrate. Perhaps this manifests as a deep trauma of rejection experienced in childhood, or a persistent inner conviction of your own unworthiness of anything better. However, the fundamental truth lies here. When you decide to let go of such a connection, you not only grant freedom to the other person, but no less importantly, you free yourself from this burden. Next, this leads to another significant concept proposed by Jung, namely synchronicity. He was convinced that when an individual begins to live in full accordance with their inner truth, the universe responds accordingly. Do you notice that after making a courageous decision, for example, leaving an unhealthy job or ending an outdated relationship, circumstances begin to align favorably? New people appear, unexpected opportunities arise, and suddenly you feel you are on the right path. This is not superficial magic. It is a manifestation of synchronicity. It means that your unconscious and the external world are interacting, communicating. Yes, this is the true place for them, but to reach it, they must trust. However, if childhood was difficult, trust comes hard. Perhaps you learned that the world is a dangerous environment, that people often let you down, and that you cannot let your guard down. Jung deeply understood this dynamic. That is why he paid so much attention to the integration of the shadow, for as long as you continue to avoid these traumatized aspects of yourself, you will inevitably attract disorder into your life. But when you confront them, when you say, okay, I will look at you, I will heal you, then radical changes occur. Let's perform a small mental exercise. You should reflect on past relationships that left you in pain, regardless of whether they occurred a month ago or 20 years ago. What feelings arose at that moment? Perhaps it was a feeling of rejection or a sense of being unseen. Then ask yourself, do you continue to seek similar patterns in your current life? Carl Jung would argue that if the answer is affirmative, it is not because you are destined to suffer, but because your unconscious is providing you with another opportunity for healing. And healing does not mean completely erasing the past. It implies the ability to see it, understand it, and allow it to become a source of inner strength. Next, for a moment, attention shifts to the topic of dreams, as this is also a pure manifestation of Jung's ideas. If an individual's childhood was fraught with difficulties, it is quite probable that some of their cherished dreams were left behind on life's path. Perhaps you once wanted to be an artist, travel the world, or simply feel free, but someone convinced you that these aspirations were impossible to achieve. And now, years later, these goals may seem distant, as if they belong to someone else. However, Jung would insist that these dreams have not disappeared. They reside in your unconscious, waiting for you to decide to embrace them again. Imagine that today you decide to listen to these inner aspirations again. What would happen if you allowed yourself to strive for what truly ignites you from within? This is not about colossal changes happening overnight, but about a series of small, consistent steps. For when you begin to come into harmony with your dreams, your energy field transforms and those around you unconsciously notice it. Toxic relationships naturally recede, while proper and healthy ones begin to flourish. It's as if the universe itself is saying, finally, I see you for who you are. The exposition is coming to an end, but this is not a farewell. Rather, it is a harbinger of a new beginning. Carl Jung left humanity an invaluable legacy that serves not only as a profound explanation of human essence, but also as a guiding star to unlocking the boundless potential of the individual. If an individual's childhood was marked by difficulties, clear signs of this are evident everywhere, in their self-perception, in the formation of interpersonal relationships, and in the inner chaos sometimes felt. However, these same signs also point to boundless opportunities that are opening up here and now for healing emotional wounds, comprehensive growth, and the attainment of an authentic, true life. Consider this key point. What would happen if you made a conscious decision that your past is not an unchangeable sentence dictating your future? According to Jung, it is at this fateful moment that a radical transformation of everything occurs. When you begin to heed the voice of your unconscious, bravely face your shadows, and consciously choose the path of self-acceptance and self-love, the world around you undergoes a profound metamorphosis. This is not the result of a magic spell or a fairy tale fantasy. This is the deepest psychology, the authentic science of the human soul. This is an undeniable truth discovered by Carl Jung, which everyone can grasp and embody in their life. Now, attention shifts directly to each of you who are currently listening to these words. It is evident that this path has been far from easy. We know there have been sleepless nights filled with deep loneliness, and long days when the agonizing question of whether inner peace could ever be found arose. However, your presence here is due to an inner core that staunchly refuses to capitulate to life's difficulties. This is precisely your true strength, your inner light. According to Carl Jung, it is the unconscious that guides you to something significantly greater, to the revelation of your true purpose. Thus, a key question arises: how will you act upon this knowledge? Will you continue to bear the burden of childhood wounds, perceiving them as an unbreakable decree of fate? Or will you transform them into powerful fuel for transformation, to become who you were always meant to be? Before concluding this reflection, you are invited to perform a specific exercise. Close your eyes for just a brief moment and imagine the child you once were. It's important to look deep into their eyes and realize what that young being needs to hear. Perhaps they need to hear words of apology for the difficulties they endured. I'm sorry for everything you had to go through. Or, conversely, words of pride. I'm proud of how far you've come. It is crucial to connect with this inner essence, for as Carl Jung asserted, true healing lies in reuniting with who one was in the past and embracing that part of oneself with unconditional love and understanding. Then open your eyes and take a deep breath. Realizing your presence in the present moment means you possess an inner power capable of rewriting your own life story. It doesn't matter how many times you've been hurt or made to feel worthless or insignificant. Today you can decide that your life will unfold differently, and this path begins with something incredibly simple. You only need to choose one thing you no longer wish to carry on your shoulders. Whether it's a destructive relationship, a limiting belief, or a paralyzing fear that holds you captive, you must free yourself from this burden. This action is taken purely for yourself. Life's journey is rarely flawless, but it belongs entirely to you. And Carl Jung convincingly demonstrated that within each individual lies an entire unexplored world, waiting to be discovered. If your childhood was fraught with difficulties, those marks of the past are not shackles, but rather keys. You should use them. You must open the gates that lead to your true self, to relationships that foster growth and development, to self-acceptance and self-love, capable of serving as a reliable support. For you came into this world not just to survive, but to shine brightly. It's important to remember that transformation is not passive waiting, but active creation, and this process begins right